Businessworld. We're here at the Gurugram chapter of the Indian Business Literature Festival, where business meets wisdom. And I'm joined by Mr. Subhash Chandra Garg, who's the Economic, Finance and Fiscal Policy Advisor at SUBHANJALI and former Finance and Economic Affairs Secretary in the Government of India. Sir, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you very much.
And he's going to talk to us about his book, The 10 Trillion Dream and more. Mr. Garg, I want to understand the thought process that went behind working on this book, and especially for the viewers, because in media usually the viewers are aware of the government's target of 5 trillion economy. Based on your experience for being for so long in the Government of India, being in different ministries, what went behind writing this book? Just tell us about that.
So, the trigger for this book came from what the government mentioned in the interim budget 2019-20. If you care to read that budget again, the government did officially mention the goal of India to achieve a $10 trillion economy by middle to 2030s. So, this was stated as the government's goal. Again, if you even BJP for 2019 elections in their manifesto mentions the goal of $10 trillion economy by middle 2030s. But after the government came in power in 2019, possibly out of realism or to make it little more relatable to foreseeable future, I was still in the government at that time. So, in July 2019, when we presented the regular budget, the goal of $5 trillion was mentioned.
I think in your book you mentioned 15th June 2019.
That was the meeting of the National Development Committee, where this was mentioned for 2024. We corrected this, and in the regular budget presented on 5th of July, the official goal of $5 trillion economy was kept. The idea was long term 10 trillion and short or medium term you go for 5 trillion. But my sense in 2019 was that what is required for achieving a 5 trillion and in the medium term and the 10 trillion by middle 2030s would require a very hard core and very business-like reform agenda. But I saw the government sort of opting for a more sort of softer approach. Then I thought, why not sort of get out of the government and then explain this dream or the vision for 10 trillion, and that's the reason why this book.
You clearly mentioned in your book as well that since the announcement of the goal, ironically things started going downhill. I mean, in terms of GDP growth, and then we had the COVID wave. Now, if I just have to understand from you broadly, given this week the Government of India announced its first advanced economic estimates, how does the path look as of now?
Yeah, it's quite an unfortunate thing, partly on account of COVID and pandemic, also partly on account of the loss of reform appetite in the government. Even COVID, to my mind, in terms of the economic management, was a bit mishandled. The first wave is where we put very stringent lockdown, whereas the case load was much smaller. The COVID had not gone to 99% of the country, and we had locked the entire country. That is what caused the big contraction in 2020-21 and made us pay for it. We are still paying for it. So, if you in 1 year, instead of growing at about 8% or 9%, you contract by 6.5%, then you will have the result which we have for 4 years, including the current year's growth numbers or GDP numbers. Our growth is only 13% in 4 years. That's about a little less than 3% per annum. which is very, very low growth rate for a country like India, which has enormous need for removal of poverty, which has a very rising population, which has a very youthful workforce, and also getting intellectually well aligned with the digital and that kind of. So, I think we will need to do a lot of catch up, raise the bar, make the reforms really hard and which is workable, get the government out of business. Unless we do it, the economy is not by wishes or by your historical well-being 200 or 500 years back or 1000, 2000 years back. We will probably underperform again.
Right. So, I think the good part about your book is that at the first part, it gives a very comprehensive economic history of the various sectors of the economy, and then you've talked about the reform for those particular sectors. Probably, which was the sector for you that you were most passionate about while writing the reform agenda?
I don't think one need to be passionate about any section or sectoral, but what need to be passionate about, what is the, where does lie the best potential?
Right.
And from that point of view, in my judgment, there are three big opportunities and challenges. How do you handle the incoming digital revolution? How do you handle the environmental crisis as well as the opportunity, circular economy, energy transitions and whole lot of things? And how do you build the infrastructure for that 10 or 15 trillion dollar economy? Not the infrastructure of past, but the infrastructure for the future. That is what excites me quite a lot, and that's why in the book you would find very forthright and critical commentary. Just to give you an example, the way we have been trying to handle the data in terms of data privacy or data localization is a complete misreading of the requirement of the digital economy. If we go through that path, fortunately the government has realized that this would be a big mistake, and that act has been, or that bill has been taken off. But for 4 years we just going around the circles. We have actually not done or come up with a real good legislation. Likewise, in the infrastructure space, we have not brought the right kind of reforms in which are required for both physical and the digital infrastructure. And the environmental, while we have stated good ambition in terms of renewables target for that, but we seem to be following many policies which are contradictory to that role. If you put anti-dumping duty on the imports of modules and those kind of things, whereas there is no technology domestically, what you will do is you will actually jeopardize your energy transition as well. That's why our energy transition is happening at a much lower space. In last 2 years, we have actually lost way quite a lot. China is adding every year what your target for 2030 is, both in terms of electric vehicles as well as the energy transitions for renewables. So, I find and that's what I have tried to elevate in this book, that policy makes so much of difference. And if we can't get that policy right, we will continue to underperform.
You've been very vocal about the fiscal deficit targets and the government's role, or government doing business. As you said in your obsession, that government is a very poor entrepreneur. How do you see the path for the government? I mean, they're missing the fiscal deficit target by a large margin, and their disinvestment target for every year. What's the reform agenda for these?
See, this is one of the most misfortunate aspect or unfortunate aspect of the whole thing. The Prime Minister started with a very right note, the maximum governance, minimum government. which meant that you would get out of the business, which is not your business. Doing business is not governance.
Right.
Delivery of public goods and services is governance, right? That is where you need to spend your tax resources and all. But you've lost that agenda.
Right.
There was a very good announcement 2 years back about starting the privatization of banks, insurance companies, but this has been literally shelved. What mistake in a way happened in the Nehruvian economy of building a large public sector continues to go on. And you look at from the productivity point of view, the capital employed giving you returns, or the losses, or relative quality of the goods produced, etc. There is no and government which is short of resources, instead of investing on the public goods and services, you keep on losing. What makes sense for losing 1.5 lakh crores on Air India? Does that service need to be provided by the government? Or for that matter 2 lakh crores investment in MTNLs and BSNLs, where you do not even provide 5 to 7% of the service to the world. So that is the big miscalculation, and I think that is the most unfortunate aspect. And both the things which you mentioned, the privatization and the fiscal deficits, are in fact interconnected. The disinvestment gets talked about quite a lot, and that is where the government is failing. Last year we could not even get 15,000 crores from the disinvestment side. But there is a lot of investment which the government still makes. If you look at the budget, last year about 3.5 lakh crores of investment was made by the government. So your disinvestment is small, your investment is so large, which requires you to borrow, that does not give you return. As a result, your fiscal deficits go up, your debt goes up. If you borrow 15 lakh or 16 lakh crores a year at 8%, you would be paying 1.2 lakh crores as additional interest, and this amount has to be repaid. So I think this is very, very unintelligent, lack of wisdom kind of thing, which is under display.
An interesting correlation that you made in your panel was that the Indian economy has generally underperformed under populist leaders. Now, in your opinion, is that true only for India, or you have seen this trend around the world as well?
See, that depends on the fact that what kind of businesses that government is in. For example, the US, the government is not in the business at all. So it does not matter whether there is, what matters is if they do some right kind of policy interventions or not, that is all. Or you have a country like China, where party is the entrepreneur. The government, China does not have a classical government which delivers public goods and services. Chinese party is actually the private sector entrepreneur. So that is why they keep on doing well, even despite remaining in the business. But for a country like India, where the role clarity is there, that the government should be for public goods and services, the private sector should be for the production of private goods and services. And if the government mixes up this role, then you end up sort of having this kind of suboptimal results.
This is an important budget for the government, considering it's just before the big Lok Sabha elections. What are your expectations, or not expectations, but something that you would like to see?
See, the way I see, the government is hugely constrained fiscally, right? You are running fiscal deficit of 6.4%. Very large, very high. FRBM goal was 3% by 2021. You sort of simply forgotten from that. If you borrow this much, as I said, you have to service it very, very high. So you are fiscally constrained. The loss of appetite for reforms and getting the government out of business has meant that the government continues to scale up expenditures as well. I mentioned about the BSNL kind of thing. You also then tend to do more expenditure on fertilizer subsidies, on food subsidies, and many other kind of populist expenditure. So your expenditures get out of your control. Fortunately, thanks to inflation, thanks to imports and the corporate profits being much larger in last about 1.5 years to 2 years, you have tax performance which has been good. So, which paid partly for the missed or not provided for expenditure, but that story in my judgment is getting over. With inflation coming under control, with demand, international demand coming down, with your import prices also reducing, your tax growth on the on the indirect taxes, the GST etc. would also come down. So my sense is that the for the next year the government is in a very big fiscal problem. I think government would like to give a signal that they are doing some fiscal consolidation, if not more. So my sense is that the government would opt for less than 6% of the fiscal deficit. There is some positive developments now. The gas prices are getting under control, lowering down. So there may be some positive impact on fertilizer subsidies. Government has also done away with this Prime Minister Garib Kalyan Yojana, so some impact on the fiscal on the food subsidy side. So next year I think the expenditures would see some increase, moderate increase, which will allow the government to plan for lesser tax increases. But the big disappointment is that the government is completely giving up on the disinvestment and privatization agenda. So there would be shortfall on that side. So with that, I think they will be able to manage below 6%. I don't see any serious reforms happening in the current budget. It's more of a continuation of what is happening this year.
Right, Mr. Garg, thank you so much.
Thank you very much. My pleasure.
Giving us state of finances and the government's performance in the coming year. Thank you so much, sir.
Thank you very much.